So, get ourselves started again. For those of you watching online that were not in the last sessions, I'll do the full introductions again, just so you know who we all are, especially since my microphone was not working last time, so you just got to see me move my lips, and that was about all you got. So my name is Sean Hendricks. I manage the technical marketing and video production team inside of Autodesk. So my team is involved in creation of show reels, customer videos, creation of demos, that kind of stuff. Over here on my side, we have Chris Viano, who is the Director of Product Management. And he is basically the guy that has control over all the people who are kind of directing the products that you all know and love. And on the side of me here, we have Adam Sale, who is actually an external person from Autodesk that we brought in because he created all of the new feature videos that you saw this year for Softimage and is a great power user of the tool. And we felt it would be great to have an outside perspective on kind of how to use the tool for some of the questions that you guys have. Things to note. I've warned this every time, and usually people ignore me anyway, but I'll say it again. Don't bother asking questions about the future of product, like what are you going to do next year, what's coming in the next release, because we're not allowed to tell you. It's not an Autodesk rule. That's a FCC and legal issue rule that happens with public companies. So asking those questions, we're just probably going to ignore most of those in the stream just because we have to. It's just the way it is, sorry to say. Because believe me, no one wants to tell you more what we're doing than we do. We would love to say what we're doing, but we just can't. So with that, we're going to dive in, and basically we're going to divvy things up. The more technical style questions are going to go over here to Adam, and then we're going to anything that comes into more kind of direction idea or thought about how the team works, stuff like that, is going to go over to Chris on this side. So we've got, of course, a number of questions. We'd set up a couple weeks ago asking people to send in questions for the event. So we're going to start with using those. And I'll keep an eye on the stream as well and see if there's anything that pops up we can answer there. Also, we've got a small crowd here in the audience who may also want to ask questions, and we'll leave that open to them a little later as well. So to start off with, we had a number of questions that have come in just recently after people saw kind of the new feature videos and things around the crowd effects stuff. So one of the questions was, can crowd effects deal with full textured characters containing multiple textured clusters?
Yeah, they can. It was fixed for the release. If I was to pull in a new pedestrian crowd, keep in mind my laptop's just a little bit slow. I'm going to pull in a couple of actors. So I'll go and grab that. Let's see here. Go into my characters folder. I've got some textured characters. So we'll bring in a guy with some jeans. And I'll pull in a couple of his poses. Let's go with a walk, and let's go with a run. Let's get an additional actor. And again, just from the speed of the laptop, it just takes a little bit of time to load those actions into Softimage. And a couple of the actions, the reason it takes so long, a couple of the idle actions are about 400 frames long. Now, normally you'd probably chop that down to about 60 frames or so you don't have to load as much data in. I'll import one more actor, so we'll just load in a girl. Let's load in this lady here. And I'll load in a couple of her idols. Let's say talking on the cell phone. Let's load in her walk. And let's load in a run as well. And then let's create our crowd. And previously there was a bug in Softimage where the textures wouldn't be transferred from the actual model over to the proxy meshes used by crowd. So as soon as this crowd sets itself up, again, it's just loading in the actions quickly. And now it's going to set up the crowd. There we go. So if I was just to put this into a texture mode, you can see we have all of the textures transferred over now. So, some of the textures, in my case, haven't been set up properly. But as you can see, some of the jacket texture, a bit of crash through on the jackets there. That's just my enveloping issues. And the jeans textures are all transferred over properly. So that's finally fixed. A couple issues to work out with FBX exporting. Issues are well known. Exporting FBX with textures is still a bit of a problem, but the development team is well aware of it, and they're on it.
So another question we had come in was around Siflex? Siflex has been problematic in that it doesn't fully expose per point edits. Is this likely to change?
Yeah, and again, with the 2014 release, a lot of people were complaining that Siflex wasn't fully functional until it had the per point attributes. So yeah, if you were to take a look quickly at how Siflex sets up, you can now work with per point attributes dealing with weight maps, or even things like null deformers moving through space, triggering weight maps, which triggers the activation of effects. So I'm just going to do something quickly here. Let's give him some muscular shirt. Grab his pants. I'm just going to throw an ice tree on there. Let's create a simulated ice tree. I'm just going to open that up. I'll drop in a Siflex node. Let's just use a Siflex cloth here. There's actually been an update since I last did the videos before the gold update, where there's a couple of new nodes in here I haven't had time to play with, but there's an example scene in Softimage in the samples folder that lets you show how the per point attributes work. But I'm going to take the Siflex cloth, plug that in. I'm also going to grab myself a collision node, collide mesh, and we'll use that as a force. We will use the body itself as a collision object. So I'll just grab the body, use my little pop-up explorer, bring the body in, and drop that in as my geometry. So normally what you'd want to do is you'd want to define where the cloth takes place. You wouldn't necessarily want it to happen on the entire set of genes. Maybe where the belt line is, for example, you might want to mask that out. So we could grab a weight map. Let's grab in a weight map here. I'll just rename that. I'll call that my cloth map. I'll turn on symmetry. I'll just paint up that map. Make sure he's at 0 sub-D. So let's quickly just paint up a weight map. So we just want to simulate the cloth in these regions here. I'll just do it really quickly. I'm likely going to miss a couple of areas. A little trick when I'm painting cloth, by the way, is just make sure that your brush coverage is at 180 degrees. That way you'll likely get into the little crevices and the pockets and things of that nature. Okay, so I'll quickly just paint that up there. So that's where I want my cloth effect to take place. That looks pretty good. So I'll bring that cloth in. Again, just select my mesh, bring that in, go and find the weight map that contains the weights. And what I'll do is I'll plug that in as a weight map. So you can see there's the new input for the Siflex cloth compound. I just need to go and grab the weights from that. And I'll pipe that in. So now the effect is live. If I just play that back, you can see it's only affecting the areas where I've painted. Okay, so I'll stop that, go back again. And the problem here now is that it's not going to follow the clothing. So again, with the per point attributes, we can also apply those to the constraints as well. So we go take a look at the constraints and you want to, I don't know, drop a nail onto the character. Sounds kind of painful, but we'll do it anyways. Again, you'll notice that all of the constraints have been updated and they have a map input. So again, I could go and paint myself up a nail map. So I'll go and quickly create another map, rename it, call this the nail map. And I want to just nail down the belt area. So I'll make my brush a bit smaller. Quickly just get that going. And again, you'd spend a little bit more time than I'm spending here to make sure it's as accurate as possible. The problem with these pants, of course, is that I believe... Nope, it looks like I've hit everything there. I just unhide that. We'll bring our weight map in again. So grab my jeans, grab the weight map. I need the nail map this time. And we'll grab the weights off of that. There are the weights. And use the value, so it's a scalar per point attribute. Again, if you just hold your mouse over there for long enough, you should get a tooltip. So you can see there it's a scalar per point attribute. Again, I need to provide a point cluster that's going to be used for that nail. I also need to provide an object that I want to nail those points to. So the body is what I want to nail those points to. Just grab that, pull that in, provide the object, and then the point cluster to which the nail is applied with the weight map acting as a fall off would be the belt line. So I'll just grab all those points there. Good enough for now. And I'll make a cluster out of that. Control L. Go and grab that cluster, bring it in, and use that as a point cluster. So as soon as I do that, it resolves the compound, and of course I can now use that as a force. You just keep stacking your forces there. So I have a finished version of this scene just so you can see how it works. Again, caching the cloth, it's a little bit slow. Actually, it's a little bit faster than it was a little while ago. It takes about 40 frames for it to simulate, and you'll see that the cloth will follow the pants properly now. So there's a lot of different ways you can drive the per point attributes. Oops, looks like I forgot to to paint out his hemline. Let's see there. Grab that, go back to the weight map. So I've got my cloth map and my nail map. Just to find that, it looks like, yeah, you can see I'm missing a couple of weights there. So just paint those guys back up again. Resimulate it. There we go. So they're draping okay now. And we'll just let this play for a little bit. And that would take care of the per point stuff.
All right. Another question we had here is...
Not really working that well there.
How can I copy the envelopes from objects that have differing topologies? I'm trying to get a character's clothing to follow its body geo.
Sorry, repeat that again?
So it's how can I copy the envelopes from objects that have differing topologies? I'm trying to get a character's clothing to follow its body geometry.
Okay. So, I mean, in this case here, you know, I'd be using like a Cyflex setup to get the clothing to work. Maybe you're doing a previs and you just need to quickly tack a jacket or something onto a character and you want to use the existing weight maps of the character. So let's see. I could use base rig here. So I'm just reusing the same character. And the idea behind this is if you can weight your low-res character or you can weight up your body mesh, I'm just using a simple IK system here, you can pull the weights right off of this character using Gator, which is found as a property. It's an old tool. Most of the power Softimage users or regular Softimage users would know about this, generalized attribute transfer operator. If I take a look inside of the rig and I dive into his geometry group, let's see, unhide his leather jacket and also unhide his pants. Oops, whoa, don't want that. A little nudity there. And so we'll just unlock the geometry and run Gator on this. And the nice thing about Gator is it doesn't have to sit directly on the surface. As long as it sits in the proximity of the objects that are weighted, it'll just pull those weights through some kind of ray casting on the fly. So I'll grab the mesh, run Gator on this, grab the object I want to pull the information from, and then just transfer either the shapes, envelope weights, materials, UVs, textures. So we'll just transfer that over. So you can see that it's now inherited the weights. Gator is a live operator, so when you take a look at it, it shows up as an operator in your stack below your envelope. So what this is doing is it's pulling the information in on the fly, meaning if I make any changes to the body geometry, those weights will update in real time on the jacket. So we'd want to freeze this operator, but keep the envelope that was created as a result. Just freeze the modeling history there. And we can apply the same thing to the pants as well. So it doesn't have to take up the entire, it doesn't have to fit to the underlying object. It can fit a portion of it. So you could just do a patch or a tie or something like that. I'll pick the body as a reference here, right click, and then just jump in and transfer the envelope weights across. So transfer. So this is pulling everything, shape and envelope weights. He doesn't have shapes on them at this point, so it doesn't really matter. You can always specify which properties you want to transfer, whether you just want to do envelope weights, just send UVs or materials over. So again, I'll just freeze that, and if you have a look at the result now, you can see his jacket's been transferred over, legs as well. And that's not to say that you're not going to do any weighting, but as a quick tool, getting about 80% of your weights done very quickly, it's a fantastic tool. It's saved my butt on a lot of occasions.
Perfect. Now, one of the questions that's been asked a couple times in the previous questions that were submitted earlier is talking a little bit more about kind of the current dev team structure. There's been changes to kind of the management for Softimage, so thought I'd hand it over to Chris to tackle that particular question.
Sure. So last year we announced Corey Moak. Corey Moak has been the traditional, or has been the product manager for Maya for many years, and Corey was taking on Softimage, and we found that there was a big demand for the Softimage user base to get more time. So we brought on an additional product manager by the name of Dan Tutino. So if you go to the area autodesk.com and you see the launch pages that we have up for the new videos and the new releases. You'll see Dan Tutino there. Dan has been a product manager in our group for a while, and we decided that we needed more help on Softimage directly. So Dan is the new product manager for Softimage. You can see his face, and so if you want to track him down at GDC, he's there right now. And again, we wanted to be able to have somebody that the user base could respond to directly that had a full-time job responsible for Softimage.
Perfect.
That's cool.
Always handy.
Yeah.
And yes, as Chris says, he is at GDC on the show floor somewhere as we speak. So surprise him if you happen to be seeing this and you're in San Francisco. He loves surprises. Why don't you... one of the other questions was people were, of course, hearing more and more about the crowd effect stuff. And one of the questions was, what's the typical workflow to what's the fastest way to get up and running in the new crowd effect stuff?
Sure. Well, the team out in Singapore ended up re-implementing a button that was in 2013. It was taken out for the early betas. But if you have a look in the ICE category or ICE toolbar, and you navigate down to the crowd effects heading, the quickest way to set up is to just go and create a new pedestrian crowd. So I showed this a little bit earlier in showing how the textures worked. And so the workflow is pretty straightforward. You can either import your own actors, get an existing one from a scene, or use a default pedestrian. I'll use a default pedestrian here because the actions are a bit more optimized. I believe they came from Motion Builder. So what happens here is you need to set up an idle state. And ideally what you'd want to do is be able to set up more than one idle state. But for now, let's just go with, let's just say, standing and looking around. And what you want to do is load in your walking actions, your movement actions from slowest to fastest. And they suggest 2 to start with. I'm going to add a couple of animation sources. So you can have as many of these as you want. But if I start with, let's say, walking slowly to walking to jogging and then to running, I'll use that as my crowd. So I'm just pulling in one actor here. So it's pulling in all the different variants. And the big changes to crowd have been in the way that the ice trees are set up. So if I just quickly dive into it, you can use the simulation menu to quickly inspect your crowd simulation tree. And if you look at the initialization operators, getting the animation sources, we can take a quick look at that. You can see what it's done here is it's gone and it's pulled in those 4 actions I've defined: peering, walking, jogging, running, etc. And then it emits the actors in a few different compounds here, emitting your actors, initializes the collision avoidance, and then initializes the locomotion data, basically randomizing your actor ID. This hasn't changed, but where it has changed is in the animation blending portion of the tree and the behavior portion of the tree. So the behavior core is an implementation that allows you to create essentially any kind of crowd effect that you might want. Right here, it's just using a very simple solver that sets velocity with a collision avoidance. If we take a look at the animation blending tree, here's where kind of the magic happens. In order to transition between different animations, we're using a new animation state node. So you define your animation state where we've got basic idle states. So it's this idle states that's using this stand and peering around. We've got our move animation states from slowest to fastest. And these states are defined with state names. So we have a move state and we have an idle state. And so this third node down here, defining state transitions, essentially blends between all of your different animation cycles. So it's a bidirectional blend between the idle state and the move state. And we can do this with death states. We can do this with characters that are just sitting there hanging out and talking. And just show you one additional thing here. So if I go in and, let's say, the target speed. So this adjusts the target speed of my characters. So the target speed of each character is 20 units per second. Of course, we can take advantage of all the goodness of ICE here, generate some randomness. So if I was to go and randomly set the speeds of the characters between, walking 8 units per second and running 40 units per second, just update the random seed there. So now what we're going to get, are a bunch of different types of actions. These characters are all set to follow different goals. So it's, if you wanted to have the characters follow different goal sequences, add a few more frames here. It's very easy to get them to do path following. Every time you work with a crowd, it's defined as a model, and this is your current crowd. And you can see it's using this goal here. So if I was to go into the crowd menu and let's say add another goal, it just adds it at the origin. and increments it so that the actors will follow the goals in this particular order. So they hit that goal. They have to hit within a certain distance of the goal, so they'll keep circling it until they actually hit it. And then they should move on over to their next goal. But, that's a kind of a simple implementation. Another kind of cool thing is, just in the beta, I worked on one little example here just to show you what you can do with speed. I built a quick compound here. I close this up and I go into my crowd nodes and we take a look at our behaviors. I wanted a way to be able to blend, say, velocities off and on. And so I built a simple node here, which is just core ice stuff, very simple, getting the particle velocity and just blending between their velocities and zero. And what I wanted to do is use null regions to define these idle states. So quickly grab a null. I'm going to use this null as a guide to help characters stop when I want them to. Maybe they want to do some window shopping, run a specific action, when they get inside of this null. So I'll pull that null in quickly. Use that as my test. And quickly just run a condition through this. I'll just run an if then else. And we'll say we want to definitely test the distance to the null. So if that's true, then we want to slow the characters down to an idle. If it's false, let's just randomly give them some speed. Randomize by range. Plug that in. And let's go with, again, 8 and 40. So I'll plug that into my target speed now. So I've just updated my logic. Drop that guy in. And let's make this a little bit larger. Let's move this back to the beginning here. And I'll just kind of... So I can stop characters dead in their tracks. They move into their idle states. So I don't know what he's doing there. It looks like he's throwing up. But... yeah, again, very, very handy little tools. I have lots of little regions I use for triggering death states, idle states, breaking into runs. Just a very quick overview of the crowd system. It's a very, very cool tool, very cool additions.
Now, one of the questions online, and of course, once we get to the kind of live online questions, I recognize you probably won't necessarily have files kind of ready to go for this type of stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the things they're asking about is there anything going on with ragdolls in this release as far as the crowd stuff?
Yeah, I had a ragdoll scene from the developers. Unfortunately, it's not working the way I want. But just to show you kind of how the ice tree was set up, again, I'm not really sure what went wrong with it, but
one of those usual file from an early beta kind of experiences.
Yeah, exactly. I think something just happened in translation. So I've got this simple scene here. Again, what's supposed to happen with this scene is as soon as these actors get within this bowl, it essentially just triggers a ragdoll state. If we take a look at the crowd into the simulation node, so there's the point cloud that manages all of the characters. Quickly just open up the crowd simulation tree. Refresh that. And if you take a look at the behavior portion of the graph, again, it's using that same kind of idea. Here's the behavior core with the simulation port. And right now, it's just driving a basic crowd simulation that's using the velocity and collision avoidance. But the developers built a little branch here that included an RBD sim. And you can see that it's getting triggered. The rigid body dynamic simulation is getting triggered if a Boolean state is triggered. If an actor is falling state is true, then we play this branch. Otherwise, we use the basic crowd simulation branch. Stefan Refer was the main developer over in Singapore, and he mentioned that this is something down the road for future releases. The main intent was to get the behavior and animation blending graphs ready for 2014, and then build on top of that. And it's been amazing to see what they've been able to do in such a short period of time. But just one last thing, if you take a look inside the basic RBD simulation, again, it just uses bullet rigid bodies to break up the different pieces of the actor and uses the same add forces nodes that you're familiar with from generating particle effects.
Now, one of the other questions here on the crowd side of things was, when working with crowds, what's the easiest way to split my crowd so they all follow different goals? I think you might have covered a little bit of that in some of what you've shown, but
yeah, I can just give you a quick example. So again, just so you get the sense of how quick it is to set crowds up, new pedestrian crowd. Again, we'll just use the default pedestrian. I'll just use these two actions this time, so I'll create my crowd. And this is a feature that was implemented in 2013. Come on, crowd. There we go. So what's happening right now is all of these actors are looking at this one goal object here. If we take a look at the goal and I inspect its ice tree, we can show the custom index of that goal as well as the group index. And so right now we're just looking at, the characters are going to go to goal 0, then to goal 1. But we can split it up into group indexes as well. So that's the group index down here. I'll add another goal. So there's my other goal here. I'll put this goal somewhere over here. And so I'll set this goal's group index to 1. And you can't see it here. And the reason you can't see it is because I need to enable that in the ice tree. So here we've got goal index of 0. Here we've got goal index of 1. And we can drive that in a number of different ways. So one of the things I'm going to do here is inspect the crowd, which I can do from here. Let's refresh that. And in the emit and initialize portion of the graph, when the actors are essentially born, we can use a couple of things. I'm going to use a goal group index here. And what I can do is just randomly pick an integer, either 0 or 1. And for that, I'll go and use a randomize node. And I'll use this handy dandy, well, let's just try randomize value by range. And that's a scalar value, but again, ICE will type it for you, so it becomes an integer. And so I'll set these actors to randomly pick between goal group index 0 or goal group index 1. And so now you should get some of the actors targeting, goal 0 and others targeting goal group 1. So it's a nice way of just being able to split up your actions, have one emitter, and send your actors moving in different paths or on different paths.
Let's see here. Well, one of the questions is actually around some of the new stuff in ICE around being able to render out multiple particle effect tests and how that all works.
Yeah. So a lot of times when you're working in visual effects, you're looking to render out test wedges. So if I'm creating fire or smoke, your director is going to ask you to do 10 different versions of it and then tell you that's not enough, I need more. So you need to be able to have one single effect built. So I'll just pull up a random sample here. So a lot of people don't know this about Softimage that are new to it. So if you're ever just playing around with a student copy, go to your Paths tab when you open up your scene and quickly just jump into the samples folder. And in the samples folder, it's all broken down into the different categories. I'll just jump into the ICE folder, and there's a lot of great examples in here. For those of you that are interested in the per point Cyflex stuff, check out ICE Blend 2 simulations. Let's see what I can do here. Let's just go with fireworks. Oh, not fireworks. Sorry, I didn't want to do that. There's a spellcast one that'll work well enough here. Where is it? Spellcast. There it is. So this is a simple, spellcast that's working between two nulls. So you got to have a sound effect in there. And I'll grab the point cloud.
It's always about the sound effects.
It's always about the sound effects, right?
I do them all the time when I do demos. I can't help it.
We're visual artists that seek the perfect sound. So what I've got here is I've got render passes. And one of the new things in 2014 is the ability to override any attribute in an ICE tree. So here I've got a single render pass. I'm going to create a couple of different versions of this. So I'll switch over to my render tab. I'll create a brand new empty render pass. And to that, I will switch my Scene Explorer over from looking at the scene to looking at the actual render passes. And I'll go and just call this Test Wedge 2. And what I want to do with that is I want to go to my background, which contains my particle effect. And I'm going to add an override to the background partition. So I'll add a property, go down to override. So there's my override. So we'll call this like a rate override. You could use it to change the scale of your objects, change the goals of your objects per pass. And I'll go and add parameters and have to dig around on my point cloud to find the attribute I need. So there's my ice tree. And if I look at the descendant nodes, I would need to find the emit from null compound. And inside of that, I've got the exposed ports that are available to the user. And one of those should be rate. There it is. There's rate. And right now the rate was set for 15 particles per second. And of course, there's spawning going on here. So the particles that are being simulated are also spawning subparticles as well. But if I was to change that rate to, let's say, 100, for this particular wedge now, I have more particles being emitted. So say 200. So you get kind of a different look there. If I switch back to my default render pass, I'm back to my 15 particles per second. So it's a very quick way of just testing a lot of different versions of something before you settle on the effect that you need.
We had another question around the camera sequencer that just came in online. For the camera sequencer, will we be able to auto-render based off the camera sequence, or off the camera sequence we set, or will we still have to render separate sequences?
No. So I think I've got a scene in here somewhere. Let's see. Demo, that's on D, scenes. Let's just go with this. So for people that are familiar with the camera sequencer and some of the other Autodesk products, it's essentially a retread of that. So I'm just importing some reference models here with some actors.
And while you're doing that, someone was asking what you're running this on, so they have an idea of the horsepower you've not got available to you.
I'm just dealing with an 8 gig Dell i7. Nothing too special.
Tell them about your tablet.
Just got a little bamboo tablet here. This is something I can bash around. I tend to get a lot of strained hand after a while. I'm also a left-handed person working with a right-handed mouse. And so when I'm trying to draw or anything, this just doesn't quite cut it. So I love keeping my little tablet around here. It's just, I don't leave home without it.
The Wacom Bamboo.
Yeah. So if you take a look in the view menu under the layouts, you can see there's a new camera sequencer layout. And I've already got some pre-canned footage here. So this is just a plotted out. Let's go to the sequencer editor. And I'll set this view here to the sequencer camera. Come on. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. These are simulated right now. I just need to pull in the actual plotted out characters. So I'll take my crowd. I'll hide my crowd. I'll take my camera sequence, unhide that. So I've got my plot. Okay, so I should have my characters working. There we go. So what you can see here is that I've already predefined a bunch of cameras. So I've got camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3. And all I've done through this camera sequencer node is, or this camera sequencer interface, which looks a lot like the animation mixer in Softimage, is I've specified a shot clip. And this is one long shot clip that I've broken up to define a bunch of different cameras. So if I take a look at this shot clip, for example, right-click on it and access my clip properties, you can see for this chunk of time I'm using camera 1. For this chunk of time here I'm using camera 2. And for this chunk of time I'm using camera 3. Of course, when you are done plotting out all your different camera moves, so I've got my different camera moves here. And I don't have these textured. Again, that's that FBX bug where the textured versions don't come over. I can plot that out. So even from 3 different cameras, just down here in the sequencer camera, we can record that out. Just plot our camera out over, let's say, 300 frames. And plot it out. And so that we end up having one camera that contains all of those cuts. So it's a pretty useful tool. But again, if you just want to have a look at, let's see if I can get rid of this. Let's open this up one more time here. I'll just run you through a really quick overview on how to set this up. Make sure I turn on my plotted crowd, so I'm not actually simulating my crowd. That doesn't play well with the camera sequencer. This set's a lot bigger than I needed it to be, so it's actually loading in a lot of reference models that don't really need to be there. Okay, let's bring that in. Again, let's unhide the crowd, the plotted crowd. Let's hide the actual simulated crowd. And I'll jump back into my camera sequencer layout, which I have here. It's funny enough. Normally you get a little icon here with the camera sequencer. I'm not seeing it. Let's move over to the sequencer editor. And I'll just get rid of these clips here. There we go. So as soon as I deleted those clips, you can see I get this icon. There's no active camera. So it really just starts with you inserting a single shot clip. So the shot clip lasts the duration of your timeline. And I'm just going to start breaking this up. So if I wanted to have a camera cut, let's say around frame 120, I'm just going to use my clips menu. I'm going to split the current clip. So I'll split it right there. Oops, actually got to select the clip. That's helpful. So I'll split that clip up. I'll make another split, let's say, right here. Again, select the clip, split your clip up. And what's kind of cool about this is, as you split this clip up numerous times, you then assign the clips to the different cameras. So as I showed you before, I can now specify that this is using camera 1. If I move my timeline back, you'll see that's actually using that first camera. As I move over to shot 1, which is not using any particular camera right now, I can set that to camera 2. You can see the sequencer camera adjusts. And then shot 3, again, select the camera, or select the shot clip and assign it to the specific camera. And maybe I don't need that clip there. What's kind of cool about this is it's very easy to retime. Take your clips, just like typical mixer workflow, being able to just jump in here and quickly retime your clips and quickly look at the cuts. You can go back in and animate the cameras as you set up the cuts. And once you're done setting up all those cameras, again, as I mentioned, just plotting out your sequence, baking everything down into a single camera. It's great for previs. A lot of the previs artists really like this tool.
Very cool. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I'm not sure if you mentioned in there, I was following all the comments coming online, but one of the questions I had around the sequencer was, when you render out of the sequencer, can you add extra frames to each sequence, or is it more of a hard edit, like exactly what you set in the sequence?
Yeah. Let's see, do I have this back here? I don't want to be in the compositor. Let's go back into the camera sequencer. So I think this is what the question was referring to. Once I've cut up these shots, there's a difference between scene time and sequence time. So again, if we take a look at this first clip and we access its properties, we can see there's a difference between the scene time, where the clip was brought in, 20 and ending at 139, and what we've actually done with the clip. We've retimed it, moved it back to frame 0, and it's out at 119. As soon as I update any of this stuff, so if I wanted to scale that clip a bit longer, you can see how sequence time changes, and it's a little bit different from global time. So it becomes very easy to retime, reshuffle, add frames to the beginning and the end. A lot of times I think what the question might be referring to...
I think it's around heads and tails.
Yeah, at this point, no. You would just have to manually add those into your shot and then make some notes about it. And
so you can set it up to have them there, but...
Yeah, but there's no visual that says, we've added a 5-frame pre-roll and... Yeah,
no automatic pad kind of thing.
Not yet, although I'm sure that wouldn't be too difficult to add in.
We've had a number of questions asking about renderers online, and I'd like to give Chris a chance to talk a little bit about that.
So Mental Ray is included by default in all our products. And we have an active program that we run every year where we work with all the rendering partners, Arnold, V-Ray, in some cases on the my side, RenderMan, to basically be able to support their releases when they launch. So we continue to support Mental Ray as the default, and for those of you that choose to use Arnold, choose to use V-Ray or Maxwell or Caustic Graphics or RenderMan, we want them to support as many of our tools as possible. There was a demo last week from the guys at Octane, Otoy. They demoed 3ds Max, and they have a Softimage plugin in beta if you want to try it. So again, there is no one renderer to rule them all. And so you have to pick the quality of the renderer that you want for your production. And again, the goal for us is to be able to support as many of those as possible.
And as I've seen visiting a number of clients, in many cases, not only is there no one renderer to rule them all, many of them are using multiple renderers in a given production shot. And it's like, oh, the background's rendered with V-Ray, the foreground's rendered with Arnold. It's like...
Even again, with particle rendering now, too, you got the ExoCortex guys, they're putting out the Fury Point renderer. And for the first time, I've been able to render, 20 million particles in 5 seconds. I mean, with shadows and instancing. Just something you couldn't do before, and motion blur. So, yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff being implemented.
Very bright guys running various different rendering tools out there and getting that all into one render is just I think a pipe dream, really.
Yeah, especially with render passes, though, right? Render passes assigning different renders per pass. That's just the way it's done now. You know? Swiss Army knife.
So in the new features mentioned, there was a mention of some new FBX improvements with regards to animation. Do you have the ability to elaborate a little more on just what changed?
I'm not too sure on that myself, because when you take a look at the import FBX, really it's just the sending constraints back and forth between Maya and Motion Builder. They implemented a lot of constraint changes, but I don't necessarily see it. If you go and grab just anything, if I grab a sphere and try and export that to FBX, even if it had, let's say, a constraint to a cube. So I'll do a soft constraint to a cube. So I'll compensate that and do like a parent constraint or a pose constraint. So I get something like that. And I might want to send that over with a lower blend weight so that you could technically, do a little bit of jiggle on your deformer, or sorry, on your constraints. But however, when you send that to FBX, there's not really an option. So if I do an export FBX, I'll just call that const. There's no real way that allows you to choose the constraints. So I'm not too sure about that. That would be something to definitely ask the developers. Maybe it's just implicit in the FBX itself. I don't run 2014 Maya or Mudbox, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Gotcha. Let's see what else we got going on here. Well, we've got a nice little discussion going on whose renderers are their favorites. One is one Arnold to rule them all. Very nice. Got a definite Arnold fan out there. One of the questions we got earlier was, I am new to Softimage. How do I access the equivalent of soft selections as in Maya?
So yeah, I'll just grab a character here. Let's pull up our Eric guy, our Vanna White of the 3D world. Is she still working on Wheel of Fortune? I don't know. That's a very
Does anyone still watch Wheel of Fortune?
No. Okay, so let's unlock his geometry. So this is a really useful tool when you're working with shape animation, of course. So if I grab his face and I wanted to use the equivalent of a soft select brush, there's a couple ways to do this. I'll just make a shape while I'm at it. Just open up the shape manager. We'll take our base shape and duplicate it a couple times. So we'll call this smile, and we'll call this brow frown. Get my spelling right. And so for the smile, I'm just going to use the main command panel over on the right of the interface. Proportional modeling is essentially the equivalent of the soft select brush, and we can turn on symmetry with that. At the same time, if you right-click on the proportional tool, we have access to a distance fall off. So if I tap the M key, you can see I've now got a brush, and I'll quickly just start, sculpting the character. So there's my little smile face. If I want to bake that shape in, quickly just bake it. There's that smile. If I go back to the Create tab and I want to create a frown, this is one of the things I really like about the way Softimage works, is all of the shapes are baked onto one mesh. You don't have to have a line of 100 meshes in order to articulate them. So I'll take my frown, and again, you can see as I'm moving those, that one point or that one region, it's obviously pulling on the rest of the points. Another neat feature about the soft select or the proportional modeling brush is if I'm working with the M tool, which is a Softimage tweak tool, you can right-click on the brush, and as you're moving points, you can actually slide them along the surface. Again, this is really useful when you want to preserve a volume. Let's say you have a brow frowning, and you don't want to just linearly interpolate between brows up and brows down. You're going to lose a lot of volume there. So you'd be able to actually use the slide on surface at the same time to help refine your shapes. And there's a bunch of other options kind of in line with the soft selection. If you right-click when you're in any kind of tweaking tool, you can see all of your options for rotate soft selection, scale soft selection, just working with point edges, polygons, or all of the above.
Okay, another question that we got in on the real-time online feed is asking about the high-quality viewports and kind of what your thoughts are on what's happening in the high-quality viewports now, where it's going.
I think the idea behind them is a good idea. They're still quite slow, though. When I was working on the new features, and I believe the developers are well aware of this as well, there's some work to do on it, especially things like the ambient occlusion and the transparency in the viewports. Those are still quite slow. I wouldn't even really consider them that usable. If you're just dealing with shadows, a few lights for dealing with rims and fills, it's okay. But as you start getting into more complex stuff, it is still a bit slow. Yeah.
And where was the other question here? Here it is. Had another question on how they can add geometry or edit shapes after the mesh is already rigged.
Oh, okay. So we've got a rigged character here. Funny how that works, hey? Yeah. So if you take a look at this, the real strength of Softimage's workability is its construction stack. It's a non-linear construction stack. So you can pretty much do anything to your mesh after it's been rigged, after it's had its shapes applied. You can remove geometry, add geometry, and you will not destroy your character. So if you take a look at his construction stack here, we've got an envelope operator, which is reading the deformations of the bones, and underneath it we have a shape operator, which is reading our shapes. I just showed you the shapes in that last example. If we look at the shape manager, again, we can see how the shapes are working. But let's say that you were asked to then increase the resolution of your mesh. And I'll just do that by adding some random edge loops here or there. I'll switch over to the modeling interface. Let's go and modify the poly mesh. I'll just do some smooth edge loops. So let's say we go and add some topology here, here. I'm not even going to add it in any kind of meaningful way. I'm just going to click and just add a whack load of geometry. And let's see if our mesh still stands up. So our goal is to still have our deformers work correctly. In a lot of cases, in a lot of other programs, this will just break your mesh, and you're going to have to start over from scratch again. So here's why this works. If you take a look at the mesh and you expand the selection, you can see that the modeling stack sits below these two levels. So all of the splits that I've added in here have been added below the shapes and below the envelope, and the envelope and shapes just pick up this extra detail. So I can now bake all of that in, freeze the modeling history. You'll notice if I move the character's head, that all still works. Nothing's getting left behind. And if we take a look at the shapes, you can see those shapes haven't been destroyed either. They just pick up the existing or the new topology and interpolate between the existing topology. So very quick for iterating through the character process.
So one of the questions that was asked actually in one of the last sessions as well was asking about kind of the process of development for the product. And I just want to make sure it gets shared out to people sitting in all the sessions. So Chris, if you can talk a little bit about kind of what goes into our decisions.
Sure, and again, this for Sean and I were scrolling down because there's actually quite a lot of activity on this forum. And again, this is the thing that gets us going every morning. Is again, we're on the forums. Dan is out on the road, and the key for us is to constantly ask us questions. To constantly, if you're ever invited to a beta user group, to come and give your feedback. And again, we're collecting a lot of these questions. You can contact us after if you want a future discussion on some of these things. Again, as we said, we can comment on the features that are in 2014, but again, some of the future stuff that we are working on, we have to have discussions with you sort of offline about some of that stuff. So, but again, we're not afraid to have those discussions. And how we develop the features for the future is, we have users come in, great users like we have here, and again, these are the ones that drive us. These are the ones that give us the feedback. They're in production. They ask us the questions. They give us the problems, and then we have the development team that work with them and interactively during the beta to basically make the features better. So it's a pretty open process. It's again, we collect the feedback from sessions like this, and it just goes right back into the pipeline, and they're constantly working on making it better.
All right, I think we have time for one last wild card question out of the online crowd. I know for sure you don't have a file ready for this one, but
okay.
it may be just a what's your personal opinion kind of question. So the question was actually what is your preferred kind of fur and hair workflow in Softimage?
I've been a big fan of the Kristinka hair system. It's a third-party add-on. The current hair system as it stands, it's great for grooming, but not so great for simulating. And so the Kristinka hair system is an add-on by Anto Matkovic. I apologize if I've got that name wrong. It's free, and it uses a NURBS interface. NURBS are polygons. You can basically style it with NURBS, groom it with NURBS. If you go to his webpage, he's got a fantastic array of different hairstyles. Good stuff to check out. One of the ExoCortex guys, Helge Mate, put out something called Milena hair when he was with Six Birds Barcelona before he moved on to ExoCortex and now Fabric, I believe. Milena still works in conjunction with Kristinka, so there's a good hodgepodge of tools that are built around the ICE framework that are really useful in putting together hairstyles. If you're just doing short hair systems, the shave and a haircut that's traditionally been in Softimage works pretty well.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So with that, we are reached the end of our timeline. So I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in for this one. We're going to have another session starting up in a little while for Motion Builder. So anyone who's interested in any kind of motion capture, performance animation, any of those kind of things, you'll want to stick around for that. And we'll have a number of questions there as well. So again, thank you, everybody. And we'll be cutting ourselves offline any second now if the people running the hardware are listening to me as we speak.